you don't know where to begin, better ask Win.
Shane, good to see you. Today we get to talk about defining your risk tolerance and expectations for returns. The relationship between risk and return is fundamental when it comes to investing. Generally, higher returns come with higher risk, and lower risk typically means lower potential returns. So to start, can you explain what risk tolerance is and why it's so important for an investor?
Well, to put it very simply, we want to determine, are you conservative, moderate, or aggressive when it comes to your market or to your investments in the market. And we have a lot of tools to help us figure this out, but we also have a lot of conversations that take place. And that's where we really figure out what the risk tolerance is. And the reason we're so worried about this, though, is so that we can make sure your money is positioned in a place that matches your desires, your feelings, and your comfort level with investing.
And Shane, I'm sure that there's, as you mentioned, a lot that goes into it. So how do you begin to help a client start defining their own risk tolerance?
Well, we'll start with something that we call a risk profile questionnaire. And it's a questionnaire that sets out to ask you a lot of leading questions to determine ultimately, are you conservative, moderate, moderately aggressive, or aggressive? But that's not the whole story. We oftentimes will wind up changing these scores through subsequent conversations as we keep talking about your feelings about the market, your feelings about the world, your feelings about money, so we can really dial in the exact amount of risk that you want to take in certain areas with certain amounts of money.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was wondering, can an investor's risk tolerance change over time? And do changes in the market affect our risk tolerance?
Well, folks will absolutely have changes in their risk tolerance, especially as they start to reach what we call the retirement red zone. That's the 5 years before, the 5 years after retirement. You don't have time to recover from losses, right? And so at that point, most folks will find themselves going a bit more conservative to make sure that they keep what they've earned over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Now, as far as market conditions changing an investor's outlook or an investor's willingness to take risk, I don't necessarily think that it should affect them, but sometimes it does. The reason why it maybe shouldn't, though, is if you see a bad day in the market like we saw earlier summer 2024, and all of a sudden you switch to conservative investments, you might miss some of the recovery that would happen, and that might not be a good thing either.
Right. Good point. What is the role of working with an advisor, and how does an accurate risk tolerance define both an investor and an advisor's expectations?
Well, aside from determining, first of all, what the risk tolerance is and then managing the account, I think the biggest role in an advisor a lot of times is got to be that voice of reason when it comes to the investment accounts and say, okay, let's make sure we understand the guide rails that we have in place for this money, have expectations that are realistic, but also prevent unhinged or knee-jerk decisions from being made about the investment account as time goes by. We've seen these things over many, many years. All of our accounts are professionally managed and set up to reach long-term objectives. And part of our job, again, is to kind of be that voice of reason and help the money get where it needs to go without being overhandled.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad we get a chance to talk this through because this is certainly more thorough than I think those 10 questions I answered for my target date fund. So if somebody would like your help defining their risk tolerance, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way to reach us is online at winstonandcompanies.com or give us a call here at the office, 602-456-1928.
Great. Shane, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Erin.
Got a plan for your retirement, cause you know it's just down the road. But if you don't know where to begin, better ask Win.